There's an outcome. They're called Rubberg machines. Okay? They're called Rubberg machines. That's kind of the duty that we don't want to punish, because so many weird things have to interact with each other that it's not predictable. And the person being sued would say, is this fair or unfair? If you're getting sued for something like that, would you say this is fair or unfair? Unfair. And if many people think that the system is unfair, are they going to want to have allegiance to a system like that? No. So the courts have said, look, duty, fine. Breach of duty, everybody understands it. Damages is what triggers being sued. But there has to be a proximate connection between the damages and the breach, otherwise, no way, Jose. You cannot sue. Okay? So those are the elements. Those are the parts of negligence that are required for the cause of action. I'm going to say that again. Cause That's magic language in the law. Cause of action. Okay? Cause of action means reason to sue. In order for negligence to be a cause of action, a reason to sue, it has to have all of those elements. If any of those elements is missing, then there is no reason to sue. Can you think that somebody is negligent and still not have a reason to sue them? Can you think that somebody is negligent and still have no reason to sue them? Absolutely. Absolutely. People are negligent. We're negligent all the time. We just don't give rise to the fact that somebody can sue us for that negligence. Okay? Sometimes as you fumble over your feet and you cause you may even have damages, but if it's to your own property, you can't sue yourself. So people are negligent all the time, but for it to be the official reason to sue, which is a tort, those four elements must exist. Those four elements must exist. Okay, let's talk about intentional torts. They're called intentional tort because the key element is what? Intent. And what is intent? It's a mental process. It's a mental process. Can I prove what you're thinking? And I'm not a magician. Can I prove what you're thinking? And the answer is yes. Through events that take place on what you do. You prove your intent in your actions. So in order for me to prove your intent, I have to show that there is a reasonable likelihood that you are thinking of doing that. Now, it's easy when you punch somebody in the face, right? Because when you punch somebody in the face, can you say, oh, I did it by accident? Are people going to buy that? They're not, although it happened to me. Let me give you an example. You know that moment when you see somebody from behind that you haven't seen in a really long time? And they're right in front of you, and you have such a really weird relationship where every time you see each other, you punch each other in the shoulder, you hit each other in the back. It's kind of one of those relationships which is dangerous. And as you're getting older, as I am, you don't want to have, because then you become more brittle. I had one of those friends, and I had seen this friend in front of me in the stairwell. It's a very crowded stairwell, so I'm kind of dodging. And then, of course, I see my chance, right? So I lean back and I go, wham! Right in the back. And this person turns around and guess what? It wasn't my friend. At that moment, kill me now, right? Kill me now. I'm all red. I'm kind of very embarrassed. Has that ever happened to anybody here other than me? No, but you can see how weird that moment is. Now, did I intend... I clearly intended my actions, but you could argue that it was negligence to a certain extent. Fortunately, after talking very fast, which as you can see I can do, I convinced this person not to drop me on the spot. But you can see how there could be a slight distinction between an intentional and a negligent cause of action. But in order to determine, you have to look at the facts and you have to look at all the evidence surrounding it. Because that's the only way to discern somebody's intent. Now, with regards to that, do you intend the things that you do while you're sleeping? How many of you sleepwalk? Anybody here? Anybody here too embarrassed to admit that you sleepwalk? Raise your hand if you are embarrassed to admit that you sleepwalk.
But how will you know if you're sleeping?
Well, your parents, your siblings, your important others tell you, hey, you walk in your sleep, right? That's how you tell? But are you responsible for those things?
Yes.
You say yes? And the answer is no. No. Responsibility grows out of our ability to think about the things that we do and our carrying it out. All right. Let's deal with battery. Battery also has elements. Battery also has elements. Okay? So, in a battery, okay, the first element that you already know, because I've been talking around it, is what? Intent. Okay? To do what? What is the object of the battery? To hurt, to damage. What else? The intent of the battery is not necessarily to hurt. You can commit battery when your conduct helps. Let me say that. You can commit a battery when your conduct helps. I'll try to explain that. So, the intent in battery isn't that the conduct be hurtful. What is the intent?
Like to benefit someone.
Well, when you benefit somebody, you can actually be responsible in a battery when you have benefited somebody. You're right about that. So what is the intent in a battery? What is the intent? No, not necessarily. You could want to benefit somebody.
To benefit yourself?
No. You could be putting yourself out.
I don't know. Sometimes you just hit people just for like, I don't know, you're mad at
Okay, give me an example of a battery. Somebody give me an example of a battery. Give me an example of a battery.
How about an intentional battery?
Any intentional battery. Give me one. Give me an example.
You hurt.
Okay, that's a battery. So what did you intend? Take me through what you intended to do.
Knock you out.
Okay? But you could be sitting there, probably you're thinking that already. I hope he's knocked out. That's not your, it's not that. What is your intent? What is it that you're intending to do?
Hurt you.
Well, that might be the outcome, but what is really your intent?
Stein.
The intent is to touch. The intent is to touch. And I use that because everybody thinks it's hurtful conduct. No, the intent is to touch. But when you shake somebody's hand, you're not committing battery and you're touching them. So it has to be more than just touching. What do you think is the more? What? How is it wrongful? By the way, that's correct. How is it wrongful? How is it wrongful?
To touch, but actually hurts.
What makes it wrongful versus rightful? Not intensity. It could be just a slight touch.
Oh, feelings?
What? No.
Any feelings? Or feelings?
No. But whose intention?
Mine.
It makes it wrongful conduct when the touching is unauthorized. The touching is unauthorized. So any touching that takes place that is unauthorized, and that's an important provision, because sometimes doctors are sued for battery. And they saved somebody's life. And they're going like, I know that I took that action, but I saved your life. Why are you suing me? And they're still responsible for the battery because the touching is unauthorized. There are certain people who do not authorize certain types of medical treatment. Did you know that? You can't give them transfusions. You can't give them fluids. You can't. They don't authorize it. But if the doctor says, hey, I'm going to save your life whether you like it or not, and does that, it's unauthorized touching, despite the fact that the outcome is much better than the opposite. Okay? The conduct is unauthorized. Now, the reason I mention doctors is because now we're coming into business torts and professional torts, and you have all heard about this particular tort, and it's called malpractice. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
You know what malpractice is?
Yeah.
What is it?
Like when you go into surgery and they leave a scissor in your
But
stomach.
what's the tort? What's the tort? Malpractice is the name that we give it, but what's the tort? Think about what you were just going to say, and put it in your brain reference and say, okay, what is that? If it wasn't a doctor, what type of tort would I think it was?
Accident.
Which we said was a malpractice is simply negligence. It just involves a profession. It just involves a profession. But sometimes, instead of being negligence, the malpractice involves an intentional tort. Imagine that you go into surgery. How many of you have had surgery? Anybody? You've had surgery, I've had surgery, anybody? Okay, before you have surgery, the doctor meets with you, right? Says, this is what we're going to do. Is that your experience? This is how we're going to treat you. And here in the United States, oftentimes you have to sign a document saying, hey, you told me that this is what you're going to do, and I accept, by the way, but if you're going to have a surgery, they tell you all the possible bad things that's going to happen to you, right? You could die, you could lose a limb, they tell you all that stuff. And why do you think that they tell you all of that? So that you can authorize the touching in an intellectual way. I knew the consequences, and therefore my authorization of your touching is appropriate. What if the doctor doesn't tell you that those are the consequences? And therefore you say, okay, do the surgery, and one of those consequences takes place. You can come back and say, even though I authorized it, it wasn't an intelligent authorization because you didn't tell me that this could have been a consequence. And therefore, the touching is unauthorized, and therefore it is a battery. And therefore it is a battery. There was a study that was done, and I watched it on one of the cable channels, about children who were born with both sex organs. They're rare, but it happens. You knew that? And some doctors decided that the appropriate course of action was to immediately operate upon birth and designate a particular sexual preference for the child. And one doctor in particular that was very famous for treating these conditions had provided the parents information about studies that were false. And therefore, the parents signed all the authorizations. And later on, they learned that this doctor had lied to them about the outcome of these studies. Because there were studies that were done about the longevity, how children acclimate if they're allowed to have both sex organs for a period of time, as opposed to if a designation to one or the other is done. He had lied about the studies. It wasn't that what he had told them was a lie. It was that the studies that he said that he was relying on didn't exist. And the parents ultimately sued based on battery on behalf of their child because the touching had been unauthorized. Now, mind you, we could argue that it was beneficial or not. That's not the issue. Because